Lissa had heard the stories about humans. Every Veltharian child grew up with them, cautionary tales whispered in the dark, warnings passed down through generations. Humans were predators, apex hunters from a death world where everything tried to kill everything else. They had forward-facing eyes designed for tracking prey. They had persistence, chasing their quarry until it collapsed from exhaustion. They consumed massive amounts of protein, their diets built on the flesh of other creatures. And now Lissa was alone on a human ship with one of them, after her diplomatic shuttle had been crippled by an asteroid strike. She was going to die. She was absolutely certain of it. The human Captain Sarah Chen, according to the name patch on her worn flight suit, had found Lissa's damaged shuttle drifting through the Kepler belt. She'd brought it aboard her cargo hauler, extracted Lissa from the wreckage with surprising gentleness, and carried her to the medical bay without saying much beyond "You're safe now." Safe, the word was almost funny. Lissa sat on the edge of the medical bed, her orange skin pale with fear, her blonde hair disheveled from the crash. She watched Captain Chen move around the medical bay with the fluid grace of a predator, checking readouts, preparing supplies. Those eyes, dark brown, positioned at the front of her skull for binocular vision, perfect for judging the distance to prey, kept flicking toward Lissa with an intensity that made her hearts race. "So," Captain Chen said, her voice surprisingly soft, "you're Veltharian. I've never met one of your people in person before." Lissa tried to speak, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. You're human, last time I checked." Chen smiled, and Lissa saw her teeth flat in the front but with distinctly pointed canines designed for tearing meat. "I'm Sarah, what's your name?" Lissa." She pressed herself back against the wall, trying to make herself smaller. "Lissa Telvara." "Well, Lissa, you're lucky I was passing through this sector. Your shuttle took some serious damage. Another few hours and your life support would have failed." Sarah pulled up a medical scanner. "I'm going to check you for injuries, okay? Just sit still." Lissa froze as Sarah approached. This was it. The human was going to inspect her, determine which parts would be most palatable, and the scanner passed over her body in a gentle sweep. Sarah frowned at the readings. "Looks like you're hypothermic." "Not surprising, given the state of your shuttle's heating system. How long were you drifting?" I don't know, a few hours, maybe more." "Explains why you're shivering." Sarah set down the scanner and reached for a thermal blanket. "Here, this should help." Lissa flinched as Sarah draped the blanket around her shoulders, expecting what? She wasn't sure, but not this casual kindness, not the gentle way Sarah tucked the edges of the blanket close to preserve heat. "Better?" Sarah asked. Lissa nodded mutely. "Good, I'm going to get you something to eat. You look half-starved." The word sent ice through Lissa's veins. Something to eat. Of course, humans needed to feed regularly, their high-energy metabolism demanding constant fuel. And now Sarah was going to prepare her, season her, cook her. "Any dietary restrictions I should know about?" Sarah was saying. "Allergies, religious observances?" Lissa stared at her in confusion. "What? Food allergies?" Sarah repeated patiently. "I don't know much about Veltharian biology. I want to make sure I don't accidentally poison you with human food." You're going to feed me?" Sarah gave her an odd look. "Well, yeah, you've been through a traumatic experience. You're cold and probably hungry. Of course I'm going to feed you." She paused. "Unless you're not hungry, I don't want to force anything on you." Lissa's mind struggled to process this. The human predator was offering to share food. That made no sense, unless it was a trick, fatten her up before the slaughter, or maybe drug her, make her compliant. "I'm not hungry," Lissa lied. Sarah's expression softened. "You're scared of me." It wasn't a question. Lissa considered lying again, but something in Sarah's eyes, not predatory hunger but what looked like genuine concern, made her tell the truth. "Yes, because I'm human." "You're a predator," Lissa whispered. "Your entire species evolved to hunt and kill. And I'm alone on your ship, injured, helpless. Of course I'm scared." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled up a chair and sat down, deliberately positioning herself below Lissa's eye level, making herself smaller, less threatening. You're right, Sarah said. Humans are predators. We evolved that way. But you know what else we evolved to be? Social, cooperative. We survived not just by hunting, but by taking care of each other. By protecting the weak, healing the injured, sharing resources. But I'm not human. I'm not part of your pack. No, you're not. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her posture relaxed, non-threatening. But you're a person who needs help, and I was raised to believe that when you find someone in trouble, you help them, regardless of what species they are. Lissa wanted to believe her. But the stories, the warnings, the deeply ingrained fear of predators that was part of her evolutionary heritage, all of it screamed that this was a trap. Sarah seemed to sense her skepticism. Okay, how about this? I'm going to go make myself dinner. You're welcome to join me in the galley, or you can stay here and rest. Either way, I'm not going to hurt you. You have my word. She stood, moving slowly, and walked toward the door. Then she paused and looked back at Lissa. For what it's worth, Sarah said quietly, the only thing I'm hungry for right now is a decent meal and maybe some coffee. You're safe here, Lissa, I promise. After Sarah left, Lissa sat alone in the medical bay, trembling beneath her thermal blanket. She should stay here, barricade the door, find a weapon, or at least something she could use as a weapon. That was the smart thing to do when trapped with a predator. But her stomach growled and she could smell something cooking, rich, savory, completely unlike anything she'd ever smelled before. And despite everything, despite her fear and her training and her evolutionary instincts, Lissa found herself curious. What did human food taste like? She crept down the corridor, following the smell to the galley. The door was open, and through it she could see Sarah standing at a small cooking station, stirring something in a pan. The human was humming, actually humming, a sound of contentment that seemed completely at odds with the image of a ruthless predator. Sarah noticed her in the doorway and smiled. Hey, changed your mind? I'm just looking. Fair enough. Sarah gestured to a small table. Have a seat if you want. No pressure. Lissa edged into the room, keeping close to the wall, ready to bolt at the first sign of aggression. She watched as Sarah plated her food, some kind of pasta with vegetables and what looked like protein chunks in a red sauce. The smell was intoxicating. This is spaghetti, Sarah said, carrying her plate to the table. Comfort food from Earth. The protein is synthetic. I'm vegetarian, actually. Never liked the idea of eating meat. Lissa's eyes widened. You don't eat meat. But humans are obligate carnivores. I read that in the xenobiology texts. Sarah laughed, a warm, genuine sound that made something in Lissa's chest relax fractionally. Not even close. We're omnivores. We can eat meat, but we don't have to. I've been vegetarian for 10 years and I'm perfectly healthy. This contradicted everything Lissa had been taught. She moved closer, drawn by curiosity stronger than fear. May I see? Sarah pushed the plate toward her. Help yourself. Try a bite if you want. Lissa stared at the food. It looked nothing like the bloody, raw flesh she'd imagined humans consumed. It was colorful, aromatic, prepared with obvious care. She reached out tentatively, took a small portion on her finger and tasted it. The explosion of flavors was unlike anything in Veltharian cuisine. Tangy, savory, with hints of herbs she couldn't identify, it was delicious. Good? Sarah asked, watching her with an expression of hopeful anticipation. It's remarkable. Sarah's face lit up. Want me to make you a plate? I've got plenty. 20 minutes later, Lissa was sitting across from Sarah at the small galley table, working her way through her own serving of spaghetti. The human was telling stories about her cargo routes, about the places she'd seen and the people she'd met. She spoke with her hands, animated and expressive, and somewhere between the second and third bite, Lissa realized something startling. She wasn't afraid anymore. So, Sarah said, twirling pasta on her fork, what were you doing out here alone? Veltharian shuttles don't usually come through the Kepler belt. Lissa hesitated, then decided honesty was warranted. I was traveling to a diplomatic summit, a secret one. There are elements in both our governments who don't want peace between our species. Hence the solo shuttle and the dangerous route. Yes, but the asteroid strike. Lissa looked down at her plate. I failed. The summit will happen without Veltharian representation. The peace process will collapse. When's the summit? 3 days from now, but my shuttle is destroyed, and even if it weren't, I'd never make it in time. Sarah was quiet for a moment, studying Lissa with those predator eyes that suddenly didn't seem predatory at all. This summit, it's important to you. It's everything. I've worked for years toward this moment. The chance to bridge the gap between our species, to overcome the fear and mistrust. Lissa laughed bitterly. And here I am embodying every stereotype about Veltharians, terrified of a human who's shown me nothing but kindness. Hey, Sarah reached across the table, then stopped, her hand hovering in the air. Can I? Lissa nodded, and Sarah gently touched her hand, the first time they'd made real contact since the rescue. Her skin was warm, rougher than Veltharian's skin, but not unpleasant. You're not weak for being afraid, Sarah said. Fear is a survival mechanism. It kept your ancestors alive, but you're here despite that fear. You came out of the medical bay, you sat down with me, you tried the food. That's not weakness, Lissa, that's courage. Lissa felt her eyes burning with unshed tears. I was so sure you were going to eat me. Sarah's expression was gentle, understanding. I know, and I get why you thought that. Our species have been fed so many lies about each other. Humans as mindless predators, Veltharians as weak and helpless. None of it's true. How do we fix it? How do we overcome generations of fear? One meal at a time, maybe, Sarah smiled. One conversation, one person choosing to see another person instead of a monster or a victim. They sat there for a moment, hands still touching across the table. Then Sarah said, I can get you to that summit. Lissa's heart skipped. What? My ship's fast, not as fast as a diplomatic vessel, but fast enough. I can get you there with a day to spare. Sarah squeezed her hand gently. That is, if you trust me enough to be my passenger for 3 days. Why would you do that? You'd have to abandon your cargo route, lose money. Some things are more important than money. Sarah stood, pulling Lissa up with her. Like peace. Like proving that a human and a Veltharian can work together, trust each other, maybe even become friends. Lissa looked at this human who'd saved her, fed her, offered her kindness when she'd expected only cruelty. And she made a decision that would have horrified her younger self. Yes, she said, yes, I'd like that. 3 days later, Lissa stood before the diplomatic summit, telling the assembled delegates about her journey. About the crash, the rescue, and the human captain who'd gone out of her way to help a stranger from a species she'd never met. In the audience, Sarah Chen sat in the visitors' gallery, watching with obvious pride. After the speech, after the applause and the renewed commitment to peace, Lissa found Sarah waiting outside the conference hall. That was incredible, Sarah said. You're incredible. I had a good example to follow, Lissa smiled. A human who showed me that predators can also be protectors, that fear can be overcome, that sometimes the scariest thing turns out to be the safest. So, Sarah said, a hint of nervousness in her voice, I've got to get back to my cargo routes. But maybe when you're done here you'd want to, I don't know, visit sometime. I make a mean spaghetti. Lissa stepped closer, taking Sarah's hand the way the human had taken hers that first night. I'd like that, and Sarah, thank you for everything. Thank you, Sarah said softly, for trusting me, for being brave enough to see past the teeth and the predator eyes to the person underneath. Lissa laughed. You know what? I actually like your teeth and your eyes, they're kind. I just needed time to see it. As Lissa watched Sarah's ship depart, heading back to the cargo routes and the life she'd briefly interrupted to save a stranger, she thought about all the stories she'd been told about humans. None of them mentioned that humans could be gentle, that they could choose compassion over instinct, that a predator could look at prey and see an equal, a friend, maybe even something more. She'd thought the human was going to eat her. And in a way, Sarah had, consuming her fear, her prejudice, her isolation, and leaving in their place something far better. Hope.